The government launches public consultation on Article 23 legislation. The U.S. says the drone that killed troops in Jordan was possibly confused with an American drone. And in Pakistan, a court sentenced former Prime Minister Imran Khan to 10 years in jail for leaking state secrets. Hello and welcome to TVB News. The government has started the local legislative process under Article 23 of the Basic Law by launching a public consultation. The government says Article 23 is designed to protect everybody and that national security risks are real and continuous and can emerge unexpectedly. Mimo Singhai reports.
Chief Executive John Lee, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam, and Secretary for Security Chris Tan held a press conference this morning. The consultation paper on Article 23 legislation consists of 9 chapters. 5 chapters focus on different types of national security offences that are not covered by the Hong Kong national security law, including treason, insurrection, sabotage, theft of state secrets, and espionage. The CE said everyone will gain a thorough understanding of the legislation.
We don't just explain about the legislative exercise to local bodies. We will also do so targeting foreign chambers of commerce or consulates.
The paper also proposes the inclusion of new offences in the law, such as external interference. What does that mean in Hong Kong terms?
To prevent external forces to use different means to interfere in our local affairs, say, for example, our local elections and decisions of our judiciary or our executive or legislature, and to undermine relations between China and other countries.
When asked about how the operation of non-profit organizations in the city will be affected by Article 23 legislation, Lee said everyone wants to live and work in a stable environment.
Surely, organizations or enterprises will not like to operate in an area which is a war zone or where there are conflicts.
The government said the implementation of Article 23 is the SAR's constitutional responsibility under the Basic Law, with the CE stressing that Hong Kong cannot afford to wait.
It's for 26 years we've been waiting. We shouldn't wait any longer. The threats to national security, they are real. We have experienced all these threats. Geopolitical tension is rising. Then the threats are increasing. Many countries are regularly updating their security law to ensure that they will be able to deal with new threats, new methodologies.
Meanwhile, officials said the legislation does not involve extraditing arrestees to the mainland, and trials will be conducted in Hong Kong in accordance with Hong Kong law.
The public consultation period will last between now and February 28th. The government said all opinions will be taken into consideration. Mimo Singhai, TVB News.
Chief Executive John Lee said that 1 month is sufficient for public consultation on Article 23 legislation. In 2003, when the government attempted to pass the legislation, the public consultation period was 3 months. In response to the shortened consultation period, the CE said 1 month is appropriate. The CE also said the public will continue to enjoy the existing freedoms and rights in the city after the implementation of Article 23.
We are confident, we are proud, and we stand high because the principles we adopt conforms with the international standard, and we're doing it in exactly the same way as other countries are doing. We will be respecting and safeguarding the freedoms and rights lawfully enjoyed by the people of Hong Kong. These standards are international standards, which is covered in the Basic Law, and also it complies with the standard set internationally, which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights.
Reaction to the start of the legislative process for Article 23 has been largely positive, but some lawmakers voiced concerns about the effects of Article 23 legislation on media reports because it covers the act of stealing state secrets. Timothy Lee tells us more.
To further explain the consultation process for Article 23 of the Basic Law, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam and Secretary for Security Chris Tang met with lawmakers at the Legislative Council this afternoon. Regarding the legislation's description of the act of stealing state secrets, the consultation papers suggested such acts related to major policy decisions by the central or Hong Kong governments, as well as secrets related to the economy, technological developments, and national security. A lawmaker questioned if members of the media will be exempt from the restrictions on the basis of public interest.
I
talk to people in the press. They have a worry. People in the media come across information and then they disseminate the information. So these people worry about inadvertently breaching the future national security legislation because of what they do. If there are exceptions, indeed, can we have clarity on the circumstances, the context, or the bodies involved before the exceptions will be applied? Does a piece of information have to do with state secret? The weather information is fine, but defense deployment, on the other hand, obviously have to do with national security. So if you have a document, you can exercise common sense to tell whether you have the lawful authority to disclose it.
The government also suggested expanding the definition of acts considered seditious to include acts against the nation's political system. Authorities also suggested raising the penalty for first offenders to 2 years imprisonment. The Democratic Party said it hopes the government would give clearer definitions on the legislation. Its chairman, Lo Kin-hei, said authorities should clarify the limits of what actions are considered seditious and notify the public of what lines should not be crossed. Meanwhile, non-official members of the Executive Council said they will fully support the legislation and cooperate with the administration in its implementation. Legislative Council President Andrew Leung said he is not sure when the legislation comes to LegCo, but he said LegCo will handle the process promptly. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The White House says it is not looking for a war with Iran after the weekend drone strike on the so-called Tower 22 in Jordan that killed 3 American troops and wounded dozens of others. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, however, said the attack requires a response. Washington is blaming Iranian proxies for the attack, which has further heightened tensions in the Middle East, with the U.S. trying to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from spreading. NBC News with a story.
Today, President Biden meeting with his national security team in the Situation Room. Under pressure to respond after an attack the Pentagon says was launched by Iranian-backed militias in which U.S. soldiers were killed. We've now learned the names of the 3 fallen troops. 46-year-old Sergeant William Jerome Rivers, 23-year-old Specialist Brianna Alexandria Moffett, whose family described her as a very loving person, a very giving person. She loved life. And 24-year-old Specialist Kennedy LaDon Sanders, her mother talking to us tonight.
She never expressed any fear. And Tower 22 is nothing that she ever mentioned to us. She was full of life. She enjoyed life to the fullest. You know, she was just a ray of sunshine for anyone that came in contact with her.
The soldiers were killed Sunday night at a small outpost in northeastern Jordan known as Tower 22, where about 350 U.S. soldiers and airmen are deployed. The Pentagon saying a drone packed with explosives hit near a housing area while many troops were asleep. At least 40 troops were injured, including 8 who had to be medevaced for further treatment. Tonight, Pentagon officials saying the drone flew in at the same time that a U.S. drone was also landing, possibly confusing the air defense systems. They're also looking at whether its low altitude was a factor. And now U.S. officials are considering whether this could be a new tactic by the militias. This weekend, President Biden vowing to respond.
We lost 3 brave souls in an attack on one of our bases, and we shall respond.
A major question tonight, will the U.S. strike inside Iran's borders?
We will respond. We'll do that on our schedule, in our time. We are not looking for a war with Iran.
Iran says it's not behind the deadly strike. The Pentagon says Iranian-backed militias have targeted bases with Americans more than 160 times in recent months. Previous U.S. responses have been limited and not deterred the attacks. Some Republicans calling for a tougher response from President Biden.
I think it's important to go after Iran. The Biden appeasement policy with regard to Iran has not worked.
An Israeli intelligence document obtained by the press on Monday spelled out allegations against a dozen UN employees who were said to have taken part in Hamas's October 7th assault on Israel. The dossier claims that one of them assisted in abducting a woman and another helped to steal a soldier's body in an attack that resulted in 1,200 deaths and sparked Israel's war on Gaza. The allegations prompted the U.S. and other countries to freeze funding to the UN Agency for Palestinian Relief, UNRWA. Meanwhile, the U.S. is hopeful a new truce deal led by Qatar can bring about a lengthy halt in the fighting. Nazvi Karim has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met his Qatari counterpart Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani in efforts to enable a new truce between Israel and Hamas that would see all remaining hostages freed. The deal calls for a truce that lasts at least 45 days, with 250 Palestinians in Israeli jails freed for each of the 100 or so Israeli hostages released.
And I believe that the proposal that is on the table and that is shared among all of the critical actors, of course, Israel, but also with Qatar and Egypt playing a critical role in mediating and working between Israel and Hamas. I believe the proposal is a strong one and a compelling one.
Israel, in the midst of a genocide case in the International Court of Justice, has accused the United Nations Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, of employing 190 staff who are also Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives. Israel says 12 of them took part in the October 7th attacks and identified them by name. The U.S. and a number of other countries have since suspended funding for the organization, which is the principal source of aid for Gaza's 2.3 million population. The UN has vowed to hold anyone involved in the attacks accountable, having already terminated a number of employees while calling for continued support. Hamas's Beirut-based spokesman Usama Hamdan hit out at Israeli allegations, saying the action taken without an investigation is unprofessional and derails the agency. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israel's military, the IDF, says they have uncovered a Hamas tunnel network under a cemetery in the southern Khan Yunis area. The Bani Suhaila cemetery and a mosque were destroyed. War crimes under international law but permissible, Israel says, because of the tunnels underneath. The long passageways lead to a kitchen and other rooms. Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant told his troops that a quarter of Hamas fighters have been killed and a quarter of them have been injured. This as the IDF returns to conducting operations in northern Gaza City, where weeks ago they said their mission was complete. Residents recently returned have once again been asked to move south. Around 85% of the Gaza population have been displaced because of the war. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
Just 10 days before Pakistan's general election, a court in Rawalpindi has sentenced Imran Khan to 10 years in jail for leaking state secrets. The former prime minister is already serving a 3-year term after being convicted of corruption, which has barred him from the vote on February 8th. The ex-cricketer denies all charges and say they are politically motivated. The vice chairman of Khan's PTI party was also handed a 10-year sentence. Their legal team will challenge the decision at a higher court. Khan's detention in August last year prompted protests and riots. He was ousted as Pakistan's leader in a no-confidence vote in 2022. Still ahead, Italy to invest billions of euros in Africa in a bid to discourage migrants from crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Welcome back. Italy is planning to invest billions of euros in Africa in the hope that it will deter those seeking asylum on small boats. This as Albania's top court gave the green light to a controversial deal that will let Italy build migrant processing centers in the Balkan country. David Garrett reports.
The Prime Minister of the Government of National Unity of Libya.
The Italian Prime Minister on hand to welcome African leaders in Rome. Giorgia Meloni is less welcoming, it could be argued, to migrants arriving on small boats. The leaders of Cape Verde and Malawi followed, greeted by Meloni, who was pitching her Africa plan, first muted when her far-right government took office in 2022. Speaking in front of representatives from 45 African countries, Meloni outlined how Italy can help development, promising an initial €5 billion of investment. She believes improving security and the economy will discourage migrants from crossing the Mediterranean Sea. The Italian Premier has long held the policy, help them at home. Meloni's proposal got something of a lukewarm response from President of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, who said Africans would like to have been consulted. He emphasised the need for actions with words, saying promises are not enough anymore. But others saw potential.
With our dynamic and booming youth population, our wealth of critical minerals, and the vast renewable energy prospects in Africa, Africa could become a clean energy powerhouse and a digital service centre and the next great manufacturing hub of the world.
Italy want that to happen, but it appears a long way on the horizon. Many are still making dangerous trips on small boats to Europe. Italy is often the first port of call because of its proximity to Libya. Albania's constitutional court agreed that migrants rescued at sea by Italy can have their asylum applications processed in Albania. The agreement prompted protests in Albania and has already raised concerns among human rights groups because they say it will push people to try more treacherous routes.
We offer more opportunities to come to Europe legally so that people can move, learn and bring their new expertise back home. And we cooperate on the return of irregular migrants because mobility must be managed by law.
There have been already 100 people who've died or gone missing just since the beginning of this calendar year. That's already twice the number that we saw last year. While these are not the numbers that we saw in the recent past, it does suggest a worrying uptick in numbers of people who are trying a very dangerous route.
Meloni pledged to stop the boats. Deals with Africa and Albania could be the answer. David Garrett, TVB News.
The national security trial of media tycoon Jimmy Lai continued today, with former Next Digital CEO Chung Kim-hung being cross-examined by the Defense Counsel. The trial took place at the West Kowloon Law Courts. Defense lawyer Robert Pang continued with his cross-examination of Chung, who said Lai supported so-called yellow shops, meaning shops that hold anti-government views, through classified advertising. The defense also displayed an article written by political activist Glacier Kwong Chung Ching in Apple Daily's International edition in January 2021. Chung noted Kwong was not a staff member of the company. When questioned by the judge about whether Apple Daily published articles submitted even by those outside of the company, Chung stressed Jimmy Lai only permitted the publication of articles that do not depict China positively. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.